This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech. Somewhere to go, something to do, someone to talk to. That's the motivation behind a movement that is attracting men around the world.
And it's called Men's Shed. Why? Because it's a place for men to gather.
And today we'll discover just why so many men are joining up as we visit with Owen Glendon and Tim Wilson of the Bruce Men's Shed in Ontario. Gentlemen, welcome to Believe in People.
Thanks.
Listen, Owen, I want to ask you first off, not so much about what Men's Shed is, but why do men need a place to gather together?
Well, I do have some opinions on that. And maybe the question is more, why is it just men that meet together? And when I first got involved with this group, I gave that quite a bit of thought because I thought, well, maybe that requires some justification. So this is kind of a long-winded answer, but it's how I feel. I kind of represent the sort of typical person in our group, which is age 65 to 85. Or Tim might be a little younger than that. And when I first joined, I thought, well, how do I explain this to my son? He just turned 40 because he lives in a different world than me. And I thought, well, let's look at how our lives are different. When I first got out of high school, I was fortunate enough to go to university. And I remember that first day at university, I was sitting in the hall and there were 700 students. 699 of them were women, or men, one woman.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So I spent 4 years basically with men. And then in my working career, which is about 30 years long, 95% of the people I dealt with were men. And then when we had children, I was fortunate enough again to live off one income. So who got home to stay home with my children was my wife, which was typical. And then I look at my son, and his graduation class was something like 60% women. He works with more than 70% women. And today, a young man, if he's married, he may or may not have a female for a spouse, and he has a lot greater chance of being able to stay home with his kids than I did. So I'm guessing that 30 years from now, when my son gets to be my age, he probably won't, be socially interact at a men's club. So I think it's what you're used to and what you're comfortable with, and it's suitable for our time now. That's how I kind of see it. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yeah, I agree, Owen. That's I guess fundamentally, my intake is a little simpler. I just think men, certainly of our age, are not good at socializing. We aren't. Women are far more supportive of each other, far more open to socializing. And when we moved up here in 2017, our place was a new build, so I spent a lot of time working on projects around the house and around the yard. And about a year ago, I hit a point where that was sort of winding down. And I thought to myself, I really, really should get out and socialize and get a life outside of the house. And I had found prior to that it's not too tough to make acquaintances. You can go talk to a guy at the hardware store and we talk about fishing for 20 minutes sometimes. That's all good. But it ends there. And trying to actually get any kind of social interaction beyond that, I found was really difficult. And so when I saw the Men's Shed ad in the local paper, I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I should go out and see what it's about. And it turned out it has really filled the niche quite nicely.
And, to your point, that's really interesting that you mentioned about men socializing differently than women, because really then, and if you could explain what the Men's Shed is all about, is it the activities that provide that sort of social element rather than maybe good just going for coffee. I know that's part of it, but actually doing something purposeful sort of then fulfills that further conversation, friendship, camaraderie. Is that why that's kind of came together?
Yeah, I think
I would I would almost say that the activities is what tricks the men into coming out.
Right. Good point.
yeah. Because once they're familiar with each other, there's no problem with sitting for 2 hours face to face at a coffee time and just talking. But you have to get them to that point, and being familiar with each other. I think we started that by basically working together. And what they say is men do better shoulder to shoulder than face to face. But I think they do both well. They just have to start it.
You know, what's interesting, I think it was Tim that just said that women are better at socializing than men. And you know, I can agree with that. But there's also, and Owen, you mentioned, you know, your age early on in the conversation. So let me just dissect a couple of these thoughts. We are living in different times, as you mentioned. I remember as a boy, my father belonged to a men's breakfast group at church, for example. Well, those don't seem to exist anymore. That was a place where men would perhaps talk about, you know, finances and those sorts of things. We also live in an interconnected world via Zoom, which is what we're on right now. So there is a lot less opportunity to get together and sort of hash things out over a cup of coffee. So men are perhaps, as Tim mentioned earlier, perhaps a bit more isolated than they used to be if you're not at work anymore or what have you. Then you sort of throw into the big, you know, martini shaker of life, COVID, and these sorts of things. And all of a sudden, everyone is isolated from their own communities. How has, and there's a lot of talk about it, and there's a lot of talk about men in our world and the way men behave and all this kind of stuff. But surely this has affected men uniquely as well, has it not?
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, everyone's felt the bad effects of COVID, uh, and I think where men maybe have felt it worse is how much they get tied up. At least people of my age get tied up in their work and having relationships at work. Those seem to be where they function, and then when they retire, they're set into a void. And there is a loneliness with that, and there's an adjustment with retirement, and almost everyone in our group is retired. And what kind of exacerbates it in our area is many people in our group are also immigrants. They've moved from London or Toronto or whatever to come here to live in what they had as a cottage for most of their life. So they've not only lost people that they knew at work and local people, they've lost their neighborhood too. So they're coming up here and they're really alone. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're fairly successful, because there's that extra issue with people coming here.
I think adding to that,
Yeah, please.
just was going to say, I think a lot of the guys that retire up here have cottaged up here for years, and they're used to their summer crowd. You know, their road is busy, all their friends around. There's no lack of things to do, and they have that picture in their head, and they move up here and discover that in the winter, 80%, 90% of them are gone, and it's just them on a very long, empty road.
Yeah. And Tim and Owen, will you, for our viewers and listeners, share where your chapter is, and what exactly do you do? Because for those who are not familiar with Men's Shed.
Okay, Men's Shed is basically an organization that provides social interaction for men. And as I read the other day, and to be crafty sometimes. So that's really what we do. I can tell you what we're not. We're not a charitable organization. We don't have a board. We're member driven, grassroots, bottom up kind of organization. And we try and do a number of things to keep men active physically and mentally. So maybe Tim, you can talk about some of the activities we have.
Yeah, sure. So one of the common themes I find is woodworking, and I see this across a lot of sheds. Is there's a lot of older gentlemen are into woodworking. Some of them into carving, some of them specialized things like bowl turning, but a lot of them are just they have some power tools and they're handy with wood. And they like building stuff, and that's something that we have used as a lure and as an activity to engage people. So we've built a lot of bird boxes and bat houses, and we're building some cornhole beanbag toss boards for a local group. And some of the guys have nice wood shops at their house, not huge, but they can fit half a dozen or 8 guys in. They'll get together, they'll build a bunch of stuff over several sessions. So that's been a really good draw. This is prime country up here for hiking. So we've organized a number of hikes, and Owen's really spearheaded that. And that's
this is in Tobermory, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's on
Okay,
the Bruce Peninsula, in the north half of the Bruce Peninsula.
Thanks.
So the Bruce Trail runs right down the east coast, basically, of the whole Bruce Peninsula. So there are all kinds of places to go out hiking. So we've done hiking, we've done woodworking. The coffee thing on Monday mornings has proven to be really a big draw. We're regularly getting 15 to 20 people coming out, and we're pushing them out the door at 11:30 when it's time to wrap up, and that's been great. There also was a group that got really into scale model building. And, I think back to when I was a kid, you glue a bunch of pieces together, you get a brush and you kind of paint it and you're done. Well, these guys are really passionate about it, and they're into airbrushing them and trying to make them look as realistic as they can. And you see some of the stuff that gets built, it's really, really quite impressive. So those are probably the most prevalent activities that we've engaged in.
The other program Tim was running was cooking classes, which was pretty popular. And it was interesting because when we originally set it up, we thought, well, these guys probably need to know what a stove and a fridge is and how they work. And then we find out we have about a half a dozen gourmet chefs. So wow, they're teaching us. So it's interesting, the men we have in this group, the skill levels that they have. What we've done essentially is thrown a number of things at them. First of all, we asked them basically what their interests were and what they like to learn. Then we threw a number of things at them, and some of them have stuck quite well and some didn't, but I think that's the way it works. And typically with each of these breakout groups, we get 8 or 10 or half the sort of active members out to each one. Like some people are just not physically able to do hiking, but that's a pretty solid group. The people doing the modeling are more the people who want to do something through the winter indoors. So we're trying to pick all those niches and trying stuff all the time.
Why do you guys think men get lonely?
I guess that's, how do you answer that question? Because they don't have friends? I'm not sure. A lack of social interaction. Some of them have lost their partners, their spouses, and they end up not living near family, and they just don't have support. Is, I think, one of the cases.
I guess what I'm fishing for, Owen, Owen said, or you both mentioned earlier that, you spend your whole life trying to achieve something for your career and your family, and all of a sudden it's done. And it just kind of, and the word void was mentioned earlier. I mean, are we not trained for this? Do we, you know what I mean?
Well, we're definitely not trained, and particularly people our age. I mean, there again, I look at how my son responds. People my age, they ask you what you used to do or what you do. People my son's age say what you do for a living. People my son's age say what do you do for fun. So there's a whole different orientation.
Yeah.
And absolutely, the cure to loneliness is social interaction, and that's what we're really trying to bring to this. And then there's no doubt about it, as loneliness and suicide rates are like 3 to 4 times as high higher for men than they are for women in our age group. It sort of goes hand in hand. There's just so much loss when you retire if you're not prepared for it.
Huh.
And
You certainly lose all that water cooler camaraderie, right?
I guess.
You know, all your coworkers, we'd go out for lunch fairly regularly, even if it was just a walk over to the sandwich shop together and then sit together and eat for 15 minutes before you ran off to your next meeting. That was socializing, right?
Huh.
And then that just, and I also found, you know, we lived in Oakville, had 2 daughters, and they were both very active in sports. And my wife is a professional, and she was traveling with work, and I was traveling with work, and we were sometimes literally passing in the airport. And so you really don't have time outside of work to pursue social activities. So you kind of rely on your work side of things to do that, to provide that social outlet. And yeah, when you retire, that whole thing just vaporizes.
And then so you think about it, you think, okay, well, I found it really interesting that this started in Australia and then made its way, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and made its way to you. And so what was the journey there? Like, did you see something? You thought, this is cool. We'd like to offer something here. How did the chapters work? How did you kind of create this for your community?
Yeah, I'm not sure who specifically initiated it and then latched onto that piece, but there is a local sort of umbrella organization looking out for seniors and has that, and there's a couple of people that are involved with that. And then there was a gentleman by the name of Bill Rusk who seemed to kind of grab this one by the horns and run with it. And I honestly, I'm not sure whether Bill discovered it and engaged with the seniors, or whether the seniors discovered it and pulled Bill in. But that was where that sort of got started. Oh, and maybe you've got some more insight.
I'll admit to it. There were 2 women locally. He said this would be a good idea for men.
I love it.
It was
Do something. Go.
Darren Coulter and I forget Pat's
Pat
last.
House.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
those 2 who are wonderful at organizing. They probably said, you know, this is an opportunity for the peninsula. So, and they set the thing up initially and got us started. So,
Yeah.
And they helped us get grants to get started. And
Right.
you know, women can be organized.
Yeah. Well, and
True.
and men can be men in a way. And
Yeah.
so I have to ask this question as well. Is there something about society's ideas about what men are all about, and you're supposed to take care of yourself? You're not supposed to be lonely. You're supposed to stand up like a man. You're supposed to get up when you fall down, all these kinds of things. So are you finding like men are a little bit timid in admitting they might need some help with socializing?
Oh, yeah, I believe that's true, but I also believe it's really changing. I see that in this generation where the pressure is off men and it's also on them. It's off them in a lot of ways because women now are active in the workplace and they're a more equal partner. But there's also for men who used to have that persona, they're losing that. So there's pressures both ways, I think.
And you're caught in the middle.
A little bit. Well, our age group, yeah, that's.
So this helps.
It helps. Oh, it definitely helps. Yeah.
How's it help you?
Well, I really enjoy people, and I enjoy everyone I meet in that group. I'm learning new things. I didn't think I would. I didn't think I was the demographic to be involved with this because I'm so busy with lots of volunteer effort. But this is a really great thing to spend time with. And I enjoy little things like if I take people out for a hike and I only get 3 people and they enjoy it, I'm happier than if I take 10 people out and it's just okay. So it's nice to share. And the camaraderie is good. I'm learning a bundle. It's just fun. It's fun. I think when they ask people why they join the groups and what they like about it, a lot of it is I feel like I belong. I have fun there. I can give something back to my community. These are all things that are of value that you maybe didn't realize you missed until you get involved.
They are things of value.
Yeah.
Tim.
And do you get, how does it work? Do you gather every week?
Tim?
Well, currently our most prevalent, recurring, reliable activity is the Monday morning coffee. And then on top of that, we have a monthly meeting, the third Saturday of the month, where we talk about some business type things. And we sometimes get people come out to that, or guys come out that work and they can't make it to Monday morning coffee. So that's a bit of a draw for them. So that's sort of the mainstay. And then we try and get at whatever activities we can, whether it's hiking. The hiking was very popular in the winter. Spring came around and got a little sloppy, a little bit icy. So it's taken a bit of a break. The cooking kicked in. You know, some of the thing like the cooking, it's a question of trying to find how to, like, it's a great idea, let's do cooking, but then how do you actually execute on it?
Yeah, like
Where do
where
you
do you
get
go?
your
What kitchen? And all right.
well, so fortunately, the Legion here, where we hold most of our events, has a small kitchen. So that's actually worked out really well. But it's, you know, it's finding something useful to teach or to share with people. You know, we have one fellow that it turns out seems to have a lot of knowledge on actually the technology of cooking. And a bunch of us are, you know, like meat and what happens when you cook it and all those things. And I think there's a number of us are quite interested to actually learn some of that technical stuff.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
And is there a membership fee, or how does that work? Just
No, we have grants which generally come with sort of specified expectation of what you will spend them on. We have a coffee can at the events where we try to collect some money. We talked about doing an annual small fee for things, and we just sort of felt that for the amount that we would get, that we'd probably lose it out of the coffee jar, because people go, I already paid $30, so why should I put a couple of bucks in for the coffee? So as long as we can hold out not charging for coffee, or rather not charging a fee, we'll just do that. Now, you know, in a perfect world, someday it would be great if we could get a real shop with some power tools that we can call our own, and people come in, we can build stuff. And at that point, you could probably make a case for charging $50 a year to cover some of the overhead. But until that happens, no.
So
okay,
that's
Kev, we'll have to take some businesses, Kev, to get them sparked on this.
Well,
yeah, what are you going to do? Send an email to you know, DeWalt or something like that, Amy.
well, if we can, we're asking if anybody in the Bruce Peninsula has 1,000 square foot heated garage with a washroom that they just would like to hand over to us for our use. We'd be glad to take it.
Be glad, because then all the men could gather and not talking about, you know, the flavors of the food that's being cooked, but of course the men want to study the science of how the food is cooked, which is so that's a pretty male thing. Tim, do you think?
Yep.
You know, we've done interviews, Amy and I, with farm organizations, for example. Suicide was mentioned earlier today in this conversation. Farm suicide is a problem across Canada and the United States. These groups get together to talk through their problems, also over coffee or what have you. Do you think men's shed is therapeutic in any way?
So, definitely not a topic I'm an expert in. But I would say it's therapeutic in so much as just any time that guys can get together and share conversations with other guys and have, you know, friendship and do something together. To me, that has to be therapeutic. I don't see how it can't be. But, you know, certainly we generally, I've never been part of or witnessed a conversation where people get, you know, deep into conversation on suicide and loneliness and stuff within the group. It's generally a very upbeat type of conversation. Now, that's not to say that out of this, friendships won't develop. I mean, that hopefully is the end game, is that friendships develop to a point where if somebody is feeling concerned, that they will open up to one of the other guys in the shed, or that a couple of guys in the shed will look at someone and say, hey, I'm kind of worried about him. Maybe we should see if there's something we can do to help him out.
Yeah, I think the sheds kind of work like, excuse me, health through stealth. That's what I've heard, and it kind of makes sense. We'll be sitting and having a breakfast, and somebody will say, I've noticed I don't feel my feet anymore, and somebody else might say, well, maybe you should have that checked out. But how men are, we just typically don't chase down these symptoms. So there's physical health also that I think we're able to at least share with other members.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you don't know that it's helping you, but it is, because you're gonna have a laugh, you're gonna get some exercise, you might do something you haven't done before. You might meet somebody that you find interesting. All of these things are probably very helpful along the way. Just before we go, because we are running out of time, I mean, I did look up the website, and there are a number of men's sheds in Canada already. How about the States and other places? Are you interacting with people around the world? You must know they're out there.
Not really at this point, right?
No, it's fairly new in Canada. I think it was only incorporated in 2022, and there are about 100 sheds in Canada. Yeah. And they're quite varied depending on the local issues. There's an Ontario organization too, but they're just trying to get off the ground.
Sure.
And we're hoping they can do things like help us with insurance rates and those kind of things. Yeah. But we've had some interest from other areas talking to us about our shed, because we think ours is fairly successful. But it's just an organization that's trying to get off the ground, I think, here.
Well, what do you think it tells you about a need if there are already 100 of them?
Wow, there are 100?
Yeah.
With across Canada. Yeah. Oh, I definitely think it's a great idea. I think it's going to continue to grow and blossom as it has through, Australia and into Canada. And I do believe it's also working its way through the US. So for sure, I think one of the challenges for us is there's three of us really that are leading the activity, leading the show. And we're always trying to get other people to join in and help out. But I think a lot of them just want to come out and enjoy the activities and enjoy the coffee. And, it is a bit of work. And we keep having to remind ourselves that we are being very successful, I think, at what we're doing, and to not overload ourselves, because it has to stay fun for us. If it's not fun for us, then it falls apart, right? So we just have to make sure we don't take on more than we should. And that kind of goes back to, are we interacting with other sheds? At this point, nobody's got the bandwidth to do something like that particularly. It's just trying to keep it rolling.
Part of what we find too is with a lot of the members coming in, they'll say, well, I was on a board all my life, or I was I directed people all my life. I just want to come and enjoy this. I want to sit back in the corner. I said, fine, there's a spot for you here. And then hopefully down the road, they'll say, hey, I could do a better job than Owen or Tim is doing. So maybe they'll step in. That's what we're hoping.
That should be easy.
And I think too, because of your belief, I mean, we ask our guests each week why they believe in people, and you certainly do, because you've created a community that does just that. So we want to ask you, each of you, why do you, we'll start with Tim, believe in people?
It's all we've got, right? I guess. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it a lot, but we have to believe in each other and seek friendship and socialization. And I guess other than a good pet, which can be kind of high maintenance, but then people can be too, I suppose.
Myself, I like I said before, I dislike people. Not dislike, I like people, and I always look at them and say they respond a certain way because they come from a certain way. And if I understand that, then I believe in them. And I find almost everyone you can believe in once you understand where they're coming from. And it's worth it, because that's where the relationship comes from.
somewhere to go, something to do, someone to talk to. Tim and Owen, thanks so much for talking to us today and sharing your story about the men's shed. And I'm sure you're going to be hearing from people. I think it's a wonderful idea as a like-minded and like-aged person. Thank you.
Thanks so much, you two. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, of course, modesty is always involved, and these two modest men tell us the story of how their little organization is not only helping one another through sort of fraternity, but obviously many people in the community are benefiting as well, because a lot of the work that they do is community-based, and they make friends, and people aren't so isolated, and they're not all in a silo, which seems to be the most popular word today in our society, and they're helping one another. So, what can be better than that?
And the fact that all of these activities kind of bring them together where otherwise they would feel perhaps isolated and not connected with other people. So, I mean, to their point too, they mentioned about how different it is for men to communicate than it is for women. And so this gives them a perfect opportunity to, connect and be energized. So that's pretty terrific.
Then stay connected to us. Believe in people. Sign up or whatever you do, and join us again next week for another episode. Thanks.
Exactly. Thanks, Kev.